Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name's Anne, but I also go by my nickname Nini. I like to focus on Midwest true crime because I'm a Minnesota farmer's daughter. Today we're gonna go to my homeland, Minnesota, and talk about the very mysterious death of Henry McCabe. The police ruled it an accidental drowning, but it's been heavily debated. What makes this case stand out is a very eerie voicemail. Not a lot of details in this case are confirmed, so I apologize now for the number of times I say allegedly or apparently. I also want to give a shout out to the channel The Missing Enigma. Their video on this case is the best one that I have ever seen, and I think the most accurate. And they included in their video a police report that had a lot of info in it that I couldn't find anywhere else. I will leave a link below to that video by The Missing Enigma. Let's get into the case. Henry McCabe was born on September 16, 1983 in Liberia. He excelled in his education, and when he graduated high school, he was president of his senior class and student body. He came to the United States in 2003. He attended California State University, East Bay, and got dual degrees in economics and accounting. He again did very well. He was an honor student. He was chairperson for the accounting fraternity Beta Alpha Psi. He received scholarships and worked as a teaching assistant for one of his economics professors. In February 2004, he met Corrine Wade. They got married just 6 months later. They would have 2 beautiful daughters together. Henry got a job as a corporate auditor for the Minnesota Department of Revenue, and the family moved to Mounds View, which is a suburb of Minneapolis. Henry did a lot of public speaking for his work.
What is the justification? What is the right thing to do?
He had a busy career, but his daughters always came first. He always made time to help them with their homework or play or watch movies together. On Labor Day weekend 2015, just a couple weeks before Henry's 32nd birthday, Corrine and the girls were in California while Henry stayed behind in Minnesota. On Sunday evening, September 6th, Henry went to a barbecue at the home of his friend Emmanuel D. It sounds like Henry hadn't been invited to the barbecue, but he either called Emmanuel or somebody else up and asked if he could go to the barbecue, and they were like, yeah, come on over. At the barbecue, Henry met up with William Kennedy, who was a man he had only met once before. The two left the barbecue together between 10 and 11 p.m. and went back to Henry's apartment, where they hung out for a while. They then decided to go to a club called Pavlitsky's in Spring Lake Park. William drove them to the club, but they first stopped at a TCF bank so Henry could withdraw cash. And there is a record of him withdrawing $200 from this ATM at 11:24 p.m. When they get to the club, Henry and William don't spend a lot of time together. Henry met up with some friends that he knew better than William. One of them was named Jonathan. I don't know his last name, but he was in the police report because he talked to police. Jonathan said at one point, apparently Henry handed his wallet to him and said he felt bad because he hadn't taken him out for his birthday, so he owed him. Henry was apparently all over the club, socializing with a bunch of different people. Jonathan claims Henry went up to the bar and ordered drinks for everybody, but then told Jonathan to pay for them since he had Henry's wallet. According to Jonathan, he tried to pay with Henry's credit card, but it got declined, so he paid with the cash that Henry had in his wallet. Jonathan didn't have his eyes on Henry the entire time he was at the club. At 1:50 a.m., now September 7th, he had a missed call from Henry. He didn't see Henry in the club after that, and he still had Henry's wallet. The missed call must have been Henry trying to find Jonathan so he could get a ride home, because around this time he went back to William Kennedy and asked William to drive him home. William claims as they were driving, Henry called Corrine on his phone. They got into an argument and then Henry hung up on Corrine. William said Henry asked to be dropped off at a gas station. I read different accounts of why Henry did this. One is that Henry wanted to get something to eat and then he would walk home, but Henry didn't have his wallet, and also the gas station was 6 or more miles from his apartment. Another account is that Henry didn't want William to know where he lived since he didn't know William very well, but I don't think that's true either because apparently William and Henry had already hung out at Henry's apartment, so he already knew where he lived. Regardless, William drops him off at a gas station and then goes home. Going back to Jonathan, when he said he was driving home from the club, which is around the same time that William and Henry were driving home, he said Corrine called him about 2:09 a.m. She told Jonathan she had just talked to Henry and he was sounding funny and acting crazy. So Jonathan hung up with Corrine and then called Henry and said, hey, I just talked to Corrine. She's worried about you. According to Jonathan, Henry said, don't mind that woman. She drives me crazy. And he told Jonathan that he was about 1 minute from home. Jonathan told Corrine not to worry because Henry was almost home. William told police he dropped Henry off at a Super America gas station. He kept Henry's keys and said he did this because he didn't want Henry to drive drunk. There's a lot of things about this case that are not confirmed. One thing that I think everybody can agree on is Henry was pretty drunk that night. It was Labor Day weekend. The wife and the kids are out of town. He was having fun. He drank at the barbecue. He drank at the apartment with William. He drank some more when he got to the club. To me, William keeping Henry's keys is suspicious, but I'll get into that a little bit later. Around 2:28 a.m., Henry called his wife Corrine, and he was apparently slurring and still not making any sense. So she kept Henry on the line, called his brother Timothy Borber, and ended up doing a three-way call with them. She was going to ask Timothy to check on Henry since she was in California and he was in Minnesota, but Timothy didn't answer. Not everybody is up at 2 a.m. Labor Day weekend. But his voicemail did record the three-way call, and this is that famous voicemail talked about in this case. It's about a 2-minute recording, and it is not easy to listen to. Henry sounds like he's crying out in pain. There's what sounds like gurgling or growling. Just a lot of odd noises on it. I'm going to play that voicemail now, but I do want to give a warning that it could be disturbing because, like I said, it does sound like Henry is in pain and he's crying out. So just caution with listening to it. If you want to skip it, I'll leave a timestamp that you can skip to. Now, to me, I can't make out any words in that voicemail. It just sounds like noises, but I'm not the best at deciphering audio. Some people claim towards the beginning of it, Henry says he's been shot. Some claim towards the end, Henry is saying stop it, or others say somebody is saying stop it, but it's not Henry saying that. Like I said, I can't decipher anything in it, but maybe you guys can. This voicemail is the last time anybody ever heard from Henry McCabe. After waking up the next morning and hearing this very alarming voicemail and then not being able to get a hold of his brother, Timothy reported him missing to the police. Corrine did this too from California, but it sounds like it was after Timothy had already reported him missing. There's no activity on his credit card or bank statements. No one heard anything from Henry after that voicemail. Police went to his apartment to search. They found the apartment unlocked, but otherwise everything was in order. It was almost like Henry vanished into thin air. Police turned to Henry's phone to try to find some info. The calls he made that night pinged off cell towers in Fridley, Spring Lake Park, and New Brighton. Those three suburbs kind of form a triangle. The timing of when those calls pinged between the different cell towers meant it was impossible for Henry to have been walking during those calls. He had to have been in a moving vehicle. Most reports say Henry's phone was turned off after he made that last phone call to Corrine, but that doesn't appear to be true. According to the police report, police say they obtained call logs for Henry's phone and discovered about an hour after Henry's phone made that call to Corrine, the phone called an unidentified number at 3:26 a.m. It called that same number 23 more times that day. It also made calls to that number on September 9th and September 10th, and then there was no activity after September 10th. Police found the number was registered to a woman in Texas. The police report did list the name and address of this woman, but I don't want to mention it just in case she has absolutely nothing to do with Henry. When police tried calling that number, it said it had been disconnected. I do wonder though, since they had the name and address of this woman, did they try talking to her? Not much is talked about this. Police looked up surveillance footage from the Super America that William said he dropped Henry off at, but they found no footage of Henry. William had been adamant that this was the gas station he had dropped Henry off at. He even went there with police, pointed to the exact area he parked and where he had dropped Henry off. Meanwhile, Corrine had gotten GPS locations for Henry's phone, and she turned those over to police. Henry's phone was last tracked near the intersection of Rice Creek Road and Benjamin Street. A police officer went to that area and drove around and discovered there was a Holiday gas station nearby. He requested surveillance footage from that Holiday gas station and discovered Henry was dropped off there at 1:58 a.m. on September 7th. Instead of going into the gas station though, the footage showed Henry walking north on Northeast Central Avenue. This Holiday was about 2 miles south of the Super America William had said he dropped Henry off at. When they questioned William about it, he said he must have been mistaken and didn't realize he had driven that far south. It's odd that neither one of these gas stations is in the direction to Henry's apartment if you were leaving the club. If you were leaving the club, it makes most sense to take Moundsview Boulevard, which goes southeast to Moundsview, where Henry's apartment was. The road William took was Highway 65, which goes almost straight south, nowhere near Moundsview. The FBI got involved in Henry's case pretty quickly, which is odd. The crime didn't occur across state lines. There really wasn't anything about it that warranted FBI. I do wonder if maybe because Henry was an immigrant from Liberia, if that's why they got involved. I don't know. On September 17th, police and an FBI agent talked to a confidential informant. This was just 10 days after Henry went missing, so you can see how quickly the FBI got involved. The informant said he was a friend of Henry's, but knew him as Joseph McCabe. He told them Henry had desires to go back to Liberia and get into politics there. He said he believed Henry was dead and that William Kennedy was responsible. He claimed on September 12th during a search party for Henry, he saw 4 men he knew standing off to the side chatting with each other. This was Emmanuel D., who had held the barbecue, Calvin Johnson, Kennedy White, and Jalal Kessely. He said when he approached them, they all stopped talking and walked away from each other. That's not suspicious. The informant said when he tried to talk to the men individually and tell them, "I know what you did," he said they would not talk to him. He asked Emmanuel what happened at the barbecue, and apparently Emmanuel said, "I don't want to talk about it, and I'm not going to get involved." On October 1st, New Brighton police received an anonymous letter that said, "Henry McCabe, his body is next to water, partially buried. Need search dog to find. Witness who saw burial scared, female young, asked to come forward, can remain anonymous and will protect." I don't know much more about this letter, if they followed up and found out who wrote it or what. Corrine hired the Minnesota Community Police to help. This is an organization that helps bridge gaps between police and the community, and they worked a lot with Liberians in Minnesota. The head of the organization, David Singleton, originally offered a $10,000 reward for info about Henry's disappearance, but a month later, he took that offer away and released a statement regarding Corrine saying, quote, "She is purposely withholding info that we believe could lead to the location and recovery of Henry McCabe. We feel we have all been misled. We have an ethical and moral obligation to the community and this organization to do the right thing," unquote. That's a pretty harsh thing to say publicly and not something you would say publicly lightly. David shared a recording of Corrine with police where she states she is withholding info and that she had given evidence to the police, but they messed it up. She also said in the recording that she knew Henry was alive, but she couldn't say how she knew. Just that she prayed to God for a sign that Henry was alive, and he sent her a sign that said Henry was alive. She said the search for Henry needed to continue because when it stopped, Henry would try to leave the country. The Minnesota Community Police were going to set up a tip line, but Corrine had wanted the contact number to be her personal number. David felt like she was trying to control everything. And after they decided not to work together, Corrine apparently accused David of hitting on her, but David has denied this. Henry's brother Timothy also voiced his concerns to police about Corrine. He told them Corrine had disconnected Henry's cell phone not long after he disappeared, and when he asked her about it, she said it was because she couldn't afford the cell phone. He had also told her not to drive Henry's car because it needed a new radiator, but she drove it anyway, left it parked on the side of a road, and it got towed, and it had been in a tow yard ever since. Timothy wondered if maybe she was trying to hide or get rid of evidence. He also wondered if Corrine was trying to push the narrative that Henry was still alive to throw off the investigation. Timothy believed his brother was hurt. I think anybody who listens to that voicemail would think the same, because Henry sounds like he's being tortured. Timothy told police that before Henry went missing, Corrine had asked them to remove the batteries in their phones and meet her in a remote location to talk. She told them the FBI might be listening. Timothy still wasn't sure what that was all about. It didn't say in the police report what Corrine talked about when they went to this remote location. For 2 months, people searched for Henry and tried to find any clue about what happened. On November 2nd, 2015, a kayaker on Rush Lake discovered a body floating in the water. It was badly decomposed, and it took dental records to confirm that it was the body of Henry McCabe. Rush Lake is about 5 miles from the Holiday gas station Henry had been dropped off at. The surveillance camera had showed that Henry started to walk north on Northeast Central Avenue, so if he went in that direction and then turned on Rice Creek Road, where his phone's GPS last tracked him, and continued on that road, it would lead him to Rush Lake. But still though, that's 5 miles. That's a long way to walk, especially when you are intoxicated. Henry's autopsy didn't reveal any sign of foul play. He had not been shot, so if in the voicemail he is saying, "I've been shot," like what some people claim to hear, who knows what that is in reference to. He didn't have any bruises, he didn't have any scratches. Time of death was hard to determine because of the state his body was in. The cause of death was determined to be drowning, and the coroner ruled the manner of death to be accidental. So police ruled it an accidental drowning and closed the case. But there are so many questions about what actually happened that night. A lot of stuff does not make a whole lot of sense. It's debated to this day. Was it an accidental drowning? Was it murder? Was it something else? So let's get into the theories. There are quite a few of them. One theory is that Henry took his own life. On the outside, Henry did appear to have a great life, a happy marriage, great family, great career, but that didn't seem to necessarily be true. William had said that Henry and Corrine had gotten into an argument on the phone on the way home from the club, and Henry had hung up on her. Jonathan had said Henry had told him that Corrine drove him crazy. When police talked to Henry's coworkers, they did find out that he had mentioned to some of them that he was having family problems, but he never elaborated on what those problems were. They also apparently had financial problems. Remember, Jonathan had said at the club when he tried to use Henry's credit card to pay for drinks, it had been declined. And it does seem to be true that Henry bounced a rent check shortly before he disappeared. He was apparently having issues at work too. Just 6 weeks before he disappeared, he received a poor performance review. And it does sound like Henry and the family were planning to move back to California and he was going to get a job out there. If it was suicide, people wonder if Henry staged the voicemail to make it sound like he was being attacked. An interesting note, when Henry was found, his phone was in the right front pocket of his jean shorts and the battery was in the left front pocket. To me, that is a detail that should have jumped out to police, that this was not an accident. Who takes the battery out of their phone when they're out and about? It does kind of make sense in the possible suicide theory that maybe he would have done that because he didn't want anybody to find his body. I also think it would make sense if it was foul play, because maybe if somebody did do something to Henry, they didn't want his body to be found and remove the battery so his phone couldn't be located. But then again, that's kind of creating extra work, because if somebody did kill Henry and got rid of him, why would they put the phone back in his pocket? Why would they not just like chuck it out the window or drop it in a different lake? Another theory is that Henry was drugged at the bar, either unbeknownst to him or he willingly took drugs. Maybe he got into some kind of drug-induced psychosis and had hallucinations that he was being attacked. And that's why he's screaming like that in the voicemail. Then somehow in this psychosis made his way to Rush Lake and accidentally drowned. Toxicology tests were performed, but I don't think they were released to the public. So if there were drugs in his system, I don't know. If there would have been drugs found, I think that would have been announced, but maybe it wasn't. And maybe if drugs were in his system, that further led police to believe that it was an accidental drowning. I thought I read somewhere that Henry's blood alcohol level was 0.53, which is pretty high, but it was noted that him being in the water for a long time probably affected that. There is some suspicions around Kareen. I talked about how Henry's brother and the head of the Minnesota Community Police both voiced their concerns to police about Kareen. When police looked into Kareen's phone records, they found after that voicemail to Henry at 2:28 in the morning, she didn't call him after that. That is super suspicious. When police asked Kareen about that, she said she was tired and went to bed. If you received a call like that where your husband is screaming in agony over and over and sounds like he's being tortured, how do you just roll over and go to sleep? Why do you not try to call him again the next morning? I know she was in California. There's not a whole lot she could physically do at that point. And I know she did try to call Timothy, but were there other family members in the area? She could have called Mounds View Police at that point or 911. It's hard for me to believe that you could just go to sleep like nothing was wrong. There is, however, a whole lot more suspicion on the men Henry hung around with that night. The story Jonathan told police about Henry giving him his wallet is odd to me. And I'm sorry, I hope you're not taking a drink every time I say that is odd. But if I forgot somebody's birthday, I'm not going to just hand over my wallet to them that has cash, credit cards, my driver's license. That does not make sense. And William keeping Henry's keys is also odd. I think it's very noble when somebody's had too much to drink and you take away their keys to prevent them from drunk driving. But I'm assuming Henry's house keys were on the same ring that his car keys were on. So how would Henry have gotten into his apartment? Granted, when police found it, it was unlocked, but still. A lot of apartments, you need a key to get in the main entry. Even with the apartment being unlocked, he might not have been able to get into the building. And the biggest thing that a whole lot of people comment on is if your friend is so drunk you don't want him driving home, why are you dropping him off at a gas station at 2 a.m. so he can walk 6 or more miles home? That makes zero sense. William had the nicknames of Pappas and Pappy. Some people claim to hear in the voicemail Henry crying out something that sounds like Pappas or Pappy. I don't hear it, but then again, I couldn't make out any words. The ATM stop before they go to the club is also a little odd. William drove Henry to the ATM and then to the club, but in the surveillance footage of the ATM from the bank, Henry is seen walking up to the ATM. It's apparently pretty obvious that he's intoxicated because it sounds like he was kind of stumbling up to the ATM. He gets his cash and then he walks out of view. Where is William and his car? The only thing I can think of is maybe because they didn't know each other very well, Henry didn't want William to see him enter his PIN and his bank account information. So maybe he had him park a distance away. Then he got out and walked to the ATM, got his cash, and then walked back to William's car. And speaking of William and Jonathan, Jonathan, to be fair, if Henry was drinking that night, it's probably highly likely that they were too. If William was drunk or even buzzed, that could maybe explain why he got confused on which gas station he dropped Henry off at. So maybe those two aren't the best witnesses either to recount the actions that happened that night, because maybe things are a little foggy. Now for the weird theories. Some people think the noises on the voicemail are growling and Henry is being attacked by an animal. Some even think that the animal attacking him is a Sasquatch. On the same note, some people think Henry was abducted by aliens, and when they returned him, they just plopped him in the lake. I'm not going to delve into those theories too much because, I mean, come on. But I did want to mention them because they do come up a lot when you look up this case. Back to more plausible theories. One possible theory is that Henry was the victim of the smiley face killer. I might do a video on the smiley face killer. They killed men in several different states, most of them in the Midwest. Their modus operandi was to go after college-aged males, drown them or waterboard them, and then get rid of their body in a river so that it would look like an accidental drowning. This was a theory in another case I covered, Chris Jenkins, who also ironically is from Minneapolis. It's also a possible theory in the Jelani Day case, which took place in Illinois. Henry doesn't fit the typical age, though, that the smiley face killer goes after because they targeted college-aged males and Henry was almost 32. But to me, in that voicemail, it does sound like Henry could be gurgling, like he's being held underwater, or maybe being waterboarded. Some think those noises are not gurgling and it's not an animal growling, but it's a sound that people make sometimes when they're being tased. And when you look up video of people being tased, they do make noises that sound similar to what Henry was making that night. You also do kind of hear a clicking in that voicemail, which could possibly be the sound of a taser. Or it could be explained due to it being a three-way call. I forgot to mention one theory when I was recording about Henry's death having something to do with him being from Liberia. One thing I read was something about maybe Henry had different political views than a different party back in Liberia, and the Liberian people who lived in Minnesota who disagreed with him sought out revenge. There's not a whole lot about that, but I did just want to quickly mention that some people do wonder if Henry being from Liberia had something to do with it. If we go with the determination that it was an accidental drowning, the timing doesn't add up. Henry was dropped off at the Holiday gas station at 1:58 a.m. When he called his wife 30 minutes later at 2:28 a.m., he already sounds like he's in distress and maybe possibly drowning. And if he was drowning, he would have had to be in Rush Lake since that's where his body was found. Rush Lake is almost 5 miles from the Holiday gas station. So Henry would have had to walk from that gas station to Rush Lake in 30 minutes. It is impossible to walk 5 miles in 30 minutes. I think it is possible to run it, but you would have to be like a very, very experienced runner and in like tip-top shape. And again, if it was accidental drowning, it probably would have happened in those early morning hours of September 7th. But in the police report, they mentioned how Henry's phone was still making calls on September 10th, but the phone and battery were found in his pockets. So what happened during those 3 days? After Henry's funeral, Corrine moved to California with their daughters. There is suspicion on Corrine, but she could be completely innocent. And if that's the case, she lost a husband and the father of her children. And it sounds like Corrine had a lot of family in California. So I think that was a good thing to move back because you need your family around during tough times. Not much is known about what Corrine is up to today, but it does sound like she is a writer. I know this case is technically closed, but it is such a mysterious case. So many theories and discussions about what happened that night. I lean towards foul play, mostly because of how his phone was found, with it being in one pocket and the battery in the other pocket. That is so strange to me. I mean, what are the odds that you're out and about, you take the battery out of your phone, put it in one pocket and put your phone in the other, and then happen to accidentally drown? I don't know. It could align with him ending his own life, but I don't think drowning is a common way people end their lives. It's entirely possible. I just don't think it's a common method people turn to. And who was using his phone until September 10th? That is the weirdest part to me, that the phone was still making phone calls to just that one number. Why has that not been talked about more? I don't understand how the police can look at this as a man who went missing in the early morning hours of September 7th. His phone is still used until September 10th, and then they ruled it an accidental drowning. That probably happened that night. Your mind can just go around in circles with this case, questioning everything. But I am pretty sure Bigfoot had nothing to do with it. Regardless of how it happened or why it happened, Henry's daughters now have to grow up without their father. They were 10 and 1 at the time of Henry's death. The 1-year-old probably won't have any memories of her father. It's just heartbreaking for those girls. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this case. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.